Hello, Ignite 2021. I want to talk to you today about something that's very exciting, at least to me, the Zero Trust Enterprise. It's a new term. Let's talk about it. Zero Trust, everybody's talking about Zero Trust. Everybody has a Zero Trust project. Different vendors will tell you that Zero Trust is a different thing. The proxy in the cloud vendors will tell you that Zero Trust is all about authenticating all users and checking all user actions before we allow them to access applications. You know, all the stuff we've been doing for the last 25 years. Endpoint security vendors will tell you that Zero Trust is all about endpoint, and that's where you do Zero Trust. And you know, a lot of FUD, and it's no wonder that most practitioners that I talk to tell me that, Zero Trust, we don't know, we've been doing the same thing for the last 25 years, and now just a new marketing BS name for it. Yet they get pushed from management to do Zero Trust, do something with Zero Trust. Even the highest level, the President of the United States, is now mandating Zero Trust in the government, whatever Zero Trust means. And what I want to do today is I want to give you a view of Zero Trust that I believe is not just a marketing term for something we've been doing for many years. It's not something that takes a little part of cybersecurity and gives it a bombastic name. It's a strategy. It's a way to make the enterprise more secure, make the cybersecurity infrastructure simpler, easier to manage, and cheaper. So before talking about Zero Trust, let's talk about trust. Trust in cybersecurity is a way to view everything we've been doing in cybersecurity, or almost everything we've been doing in cybersecurity for the last 27 years, at least the 27 years that I've been in the industry. Before it was called even information security. If you use the trust lens, then going back 27 years ago, life was simple. There were 5 network security vendors and 3 endpoint security vendors, and you had to choose one from here and one from here, deploy it, and you were happy. And what the network security vendors did is they let you or helped you decide whether you can trust a connection that's being opened into your infrastructure or out of your infrastructure. And the antivirus vendors were helping you to decide whether you can trust a new executable before running it on an endpoint, or things like that. So it was helping us to make simple trust decisions. These were all the trust decisions we had to make at the time. But then more and more challenges emerged in cybersecurity. Can we trust users? Okay, so two-factor authentication, if you remember Secure ID, RSA, in the mid-90s, it's all about whether we can trust users or not, whether we know the user that's trying to connect to our infrastructure or out of our infrastructure, and whether we can trust them. And then we cannot trust the content of packets. Okay, IDS, IPS. We cannot trust URLs. URL filtering help us decide whether we can trust the URL or not. What about files we've never seen before? Okay, let's create a sandbox. The sandbox can help us decide whether we can trust a file we've never seen before or cannot, and so on. So really, a lot of what we've been doing in cybersecurity was about helping us decide whether we can trust something or not. And we did it in a whack-a-mole way. Every time there was a new challenge, a new mole popped up, we hit it with a new tool that we bought from a new vendor. And of course, we all know the mess we're in right now with dozens of solutions from dozens of vendors deployed in the infrastructure. So that's trust. And maybe a side note, Lee will talk later about recent breaches and maybe the cause for them and so on. I personally believe that, yes, the adversaries are becoming more sophisticated, but that's not the main reason we're seeing an explosion in data breaches. I actually think that it's more about them becoming persistent, more about them becoming more motivated, and more importantly, our infrastructure has become much more complicated and much easier to exploit. If you really look at the details of many of the recent data breaches, it's really about complexity. The reason we couldn't stop the attack was complexity and not sophistication on the adversary side. In some cases it is, in most cases it wasn't. So if we can find a way to simplify the infrastructure and not whack malls all the time, I think we'll be more secure. And zero trust, as I said, is a way to do that. But maybe before talking about what zero trust is, let's talk about the opposite of zero trust, which is implicit trust. So what is implicit trust? In many, many situations, we implicitly trust things versus other situations. So for example, if we have an employee working in a main office at headquarters, accessing an application deployed in local data center, versus, let's take the other extreme, an employee sitting at a coffee shop in some other country trying to access applications deployed in a public cloud. We would treat these two differently. In the first case, probably won't even use two-factor authentication, maybe user ID. We're not going to check the traffic for many, many different things that we do in the other case, right? In the other case, we're going to run them through maybe a proxy in the cloud and tons of checks around malware and command and control connections and sandboxing. And then there's going to be a firewall in the VPC that they're going to, and some cloud security and so on. Very different security based on the situation, which means that in the former case, we implicitly trust the user, we implicitly trust that there is no malware involved and no exploits involved and so on, just because the user swiped a magnetic badge when they entered the office, and we trust some things about that and about the office. So that's implicit trust. Another case of implicit trust is with applications. So traditionally, if we had two applications that need to talk to each other or two components of the same application, for example, microservices, when the applications were deployed in the traditional data center, physical data center, we usually didn't check for everything. Maybe there was network segmentation, but that's it. Now that applications are moving to public cloud, we want to do, and we do a lot of checks between components of the same application, between microservices, especially if they are deployed in different public clouds. So you have a container in one public cloud data center trying to access a component or a container or a VM in another data center. We check for a lot of things, which means that in the traditional data center, we implicitly trust things because, I don't know, it's a physical data center that we don't trust in public clouds. So that's implicit trust. So zero trust is about eliminating all implicit trust. So there's no implicit trust. If you believe that a user sitting in a coffee shop accessing a public cloud application has to go through a list of 10, 20, whatever different things that you check for, you're going to check for that in every situation, even if it's an employee sitting in a physical office accessing a physical local data center. Same thing with applications. We'll talk about it in a second. Okay, so that's zero trust. So in one sentence, zero trust is about eliminating all implicit trust. Now, if we do that, first, we end up with a much more secure infrastructure. Why? Because there's no implicit trust. We take all the things that we check for to the extreme, no matter what the situation is. So it's more secure. Also, we only have one use case. If it doesn't matter who the user is, where they sit physically, where they sit geographically, what kind of connectivity they use, where the application is, where do they go to, how do they access the application. If we treat all of these as one thing, the same, we only have one use case, which makes our infrastructure, our cybersecurity infrastructure, much simpler, much cheaper, and much easier to manage. So zero trust, the way we define it, the elimination of all implicit trust, makes you much more secure, makes the infrastructure much simpler, and is, by the way, much cheaper and can be deployed very, very quickly. Win-win situation for everyone. The only thing we have to do is we have to change our mindset from whacking malls to there's only one use case. It's hard. When I talk to customers about it, it takes a while to make that switch because we've been conditioned for the last 20-something years to buy different things in different use cases and go and buy more and more and more and more cybersecurity solutions. But I think the time is right to change that mindset. And the reason the time is right to change that mindset is because many of you, we included, are going through major transformation of our infrastructure. We are transforming our wide area network to accommodate the hybrid workforce. Lee, of course, will talk about it much more. We are moving from traditional data centers to public cloud, which means we have to redo our cloud, data center security. In the cloud, it's going to be different. Lee is going to talk about that as well. And also, we're seeing many customers re-architecting their security operations center because of the need for automation and so on. And the SOC has a role in Zero Trust, which I'll cover in a few minutes. Okay, so I believe that this is the right time in history for us to make this transition, to make this switch, which is, again, very, very hard. And I'm here trying to pitch that to you. And hopefully, 10% of you will agree with me now. And I know that 100% of you will agree with me in several years. This is the right time in history to make that switch, to make the switch from I have different use cases and a user sitting here trying to access this kind of application needs this solution, and a user sitting here trying to access that application needs that solution, to no, there's one use case. I'm going to solve all these use cases with one solution. Lee is going to cover that. I think it's the right time in history to do that. Okay? If you do that, then you become a zero trust enterprise. You eliminate all implicit trust in the enterprise, and you become a zero trust enterprise. And let's talk a little bit about how one can deliver the zero trust enterprise. So there are really three different things we need to secure, or three different things of zero trust. There is zero trust for users trying to access application. We talked about it quite a bit. There is zero trust for applications, different applications talking to each other, components of applications, microservices talking to each other. We need to do zero trust there as well. We cannot trust different components of applications, even in traditional data center. And there is zero trust for infrastructure. Infrastructure meaning our routers and switches and IoTs and OTs and things like SolarWind, which in a sense is becoming part of the infrastructure once you deploy it, and it updates itself and so on, and we all know what happened there. All this is infrastructure, and there is zero trust for infrastructure. We cannot trust the infrastructure. The fact that we bought a router from a reputable vendor and deployed it and updated the software doesn't mean we can trust it. We have to apply zero trust to it. It has to do with supply chain and so on. We'll talk a little bit about that. So there are three types of zero trust. Let's look at each of them very, very quickly and what we need to do. I'm not going to cover everything that's written in the slide, but essentially, zero trust for users, we have to do four things. We cannot trust the identity of the user. We have to verify the identity of the user. We cannot trust the device that the user is using, the endpoint, laptop, desktop, mobile device, whatever the user is using. We cannot trust the access, meaning the fact that we trust the user, we know it's Nir, we trust the device, okay, Nir laptop is okay. Nir trying to access application X versus Y doesn't mean Nir is allowed to access application X or application Y or perform a function within the application. So we have to verify that trust, that access, that we can trust what Nir is trying to do. And we cannot trust the content of the transaction or the transaction itself. The fact that Nir is allowed to access certain application, certain function within an application and upload a PowerPoint presentation doesn't mean that PowerPoint presentation is going to be free of exploits and in both directions and so on. So that's zero trust for users. Zero trust for applications is very, very similar. In zero trust for applications, same idea. We cannot trust the users that access the application, like administrators and so on. In this case, the applications don't run on user devices. They run on workloads, servers, VMs, containers, and so on. We cannot trust those. We have to verify those. When applications access each other or access other resources, we cannot trust that, and we cannot trust the content of transactions. And then when we talk about zero trust for infrastructure, very, very similar. Not going to go through all of that. You can read it very quickly, but same thing. There is the users that use the IoT devices or whatever it is, like, things like SolarWind, any kind of appliances. There is the device itself. There is the access to the device and from the device to the internet, for example, which turns out to be one of the places that performing access can help us deal with supply chain challenges. And there is the transaction itself. We have to look at what's running there. If you take all these and put them into a matrix, it looks like this. Very, very complicated. The interesting thing is that different vendors in the industry are focusing on different cells in this matrix and sometimes on part of a cell. I keep mentioning endpoint security vendors. So endpoint security vendors would focus on, some of them focus on the device part for users, and some of them focus on, these are the traditional endpoint security vendors, and then we have cloud endpoint security vendors, or CWP, cloud workload protection vendors that focus on securing the devices, the workloads in the cloud. And then, my favorite, the proxy in the cloud vendors that take the access component of zero trust for users, and they do part of it. They do it for one use case. And then they expect you to go and buy the different use cases from other vendors, like a user in an office trying to access a local data center, and also they expect you to go and buy all the rest from other vendors. We believe that there's a better approach, and the better approach is this. The better approach is to try to do it with platforms. And you can see here how once you choose an identity and access management vendor with a network security platform, which Lee will talk about, with a cloud security platform, which Lee is going to talk about, and with endpoint security that works for both user devices and workloads, Lee is going to talk about that as well, we can cover the entire zero trust map, and you can become the zero trust enterprise. Again, an enterprise that has decided to eliminate all implicit trust and have one use case. Lee's going to talk about some other components that are relevant for zero trust. For example, Lee is going to talk about DLP and next-gen CASB, next-gen DLP, and how today we apply DLP to email traffic, and we apply DLP on endpoints and so on, but we sometimes forget to apply DLP for applications like Instant Messenger for Slack. We've seen data leaking out of Slack. It's, message, and so DLP needs to work on Slack, and DLP needs to work on other applications. These are SaaS applications. Traditionally, CASB solutions have been a compliance tool. Now that we're looking at CASB becoming a security tool, we need to take the same DLP that we apply on the network, on the endpoint, and other places for applications like email and web browsing, and apply it to next-gen applications, SaaS applications, and so on. So that's another component of zero trust. DLP has to be the same across the entire infrastructure. So one thing to note is that work for home is becoming a major use case. And it's becoming a major use case because it's very easy to break into your organization from people's home. If I want to find your home IP address, I can do it in 2 seconds. I send you an email with an embedded image in it. You open it from your home. It goes to fetch that image from my web server. I know your home IP address. Now I go to an internet database, a dark web database, and I check whether I have a compromised TV, compromised camera, compromised Philips light bulb or something like that in your home. Based on the IP address, I'm in your home. From there, jumping to the employee's laptop, unless you have personal firewall, managed personal firewall deployed across the all your devices. I jump to the employee laptop, and then from there, we know what happens. The last thing I want to talk about is the role of the Security Operations Center in Zero Trust. Very often, when organizations look at Zero Trust, they completely forget that at the end of the day, there is a Security Operations Center that looks at everything and has to be part of Zero Trust. And the role of the SOC in trust can be viewed as re-evaluating trust decisions, meaning the infrastructure has made decisions. The firewall has decided to accept the connection. The IDS, IPS decided that the connection doesn't have any malicious content. The anti-malware decided that it's okay. The endpoint security decided it was okay. Identity and access management decided that the user was okay, and so on. Now all that information comes to the SOC, and the role of the SOC is to re-evaluate those decisions. The reason the SOC can do that better than the infrastructure is because, number one, the infrastructure has a few milliseconds to make a decision. And number two, and the SOC has more. And number two, which is more important, the SOC has a view of the entire infrastructure. The SOC gets information from the network, from endpoints, from identity and access management solutions, from the cloud, from applications, and so on. So there's more information. The SOC can make better decisions. So the role of the SOC in zero trust is to reevaluate trust decisions and do it in a zero trust way. What does it mean, a zero trust way? It means that the days when the SOC can guesstimate which alerts it can ignore and which alerts should be handled are gone. All alerts should be treated the same. The alert that you decided not to investigate might have been the alert you should have investigated. You can ask many organizations that were breached about it. We have to start, or we have to stop trusting, implicitly trusting alerts coming in and investigate all alerts. How do we do that? Well, when we design the next generation SOC, we have to figure out how to do that. Lee is going to talk more about it. He's going to give you examples of how the Palo Alto Network SOC is doing that, and a few of our customers. And hopefully, when you think about becoming a zero trust enterprise, you're not going to neglect the role of the SOC, the Security Operations Center, in becoming part of that zero trust and eliminating all implicit trust in the SOC. That's all I have. Thank you very much for listening. And now let's move on to Lee Klarich, who, like always, takes what I talk about and tell you what we really do. Bye, everyone.